Welcome back everyone, this is Dave from Corman Productions, here to do another rewatch video of Quantum Leap, Season 2, Episode 12, titled Animal Frat. The episode's description reads as follows. Finding himself the king of an animal house fraternity, Sam must win the confidence of a beautiful female activist and prevent the bombing of a school building. The episode was directed by Gilbert M. Shelton, who we've talked about before, and was written by Donald P. Belzerio and Chris Rapunzel. Chris also wrote 9 other episodes of the series and had 1 teleplay credit. He also wrote an episode of The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr., 2 episodes of The X-Files, 6 episodes of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. He's one of the people that have crossover work between the 2 series. And he also has writing credits on a number of Outer Limits episodes. In addition to that, he has a couple of producing credits, including 65 episodes of Quantum Leap, 22 episodes of Lois and Clark, and 6 episodes of Silk Stockings. The episode takes place on October 19th, 1967, and originally aired on January 3rd, 1990. This would be the first episode of the series to take place in the 90s, or rather to air in the 90s. Before going any further, I will tell you a couple of things. 1. This is not a spoiler-free video, so if you hadn't watched the episode, please go and check it out, and then come back and watch my video. Secondly, if you like this video and want to support the channel, please like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This episode is basically Quantum Leap meets 80s sex comedies. The title of the episode, Animal Frat, is a play on one such movie in Animal House, which is actually mentioned in the episode's description, which starred John Belushi. This is a very lightweight episode, though with an occasional attempt to take a serious look at the morality of war. This episode is better than the episode that preceded it in A Portrait for Troyan. It's definitely a step up. It's a fun episode, but also one that doesn't offer the opportunities to have a lot of commentary. As a result, this will probably be a shorter video than the norm. A scene-by-scene, play-by-play would just be talking about Sam's and his friends' various antics, and that's not something that I have a whole lot of interest in talking about. Nevertheless, there are a few interesting things to talk about in this episode. A couple of odd things to talk about before we go into the actual episode itself. 1. The ending of the last episode ended with Sam leaping into a rerun of the series in Kamikaze Kid, which was totally not the next episode of the series. And to make it even weirder, this episode starts with them talking about the events of Kamikaze Kid before he leaps into the wild thing. And it's weird because, once again, that was not the prior episode. Secondly, is that they have updated the opening. They now have a narration by a guy whose voice I don't recognize. It's not yet the Deborah Pratt version, but it is essentially what Deborah Pratt says when she is now doing the new opening, which is, I'm assuming, going to happen by the end of the season. Like I said, I'm not really sure who that guy was who did that narration, but it plays very creepily at first. We open this episode with Sam leaping in and having beer poured on him, while we hear typical party music, rock and roll from the time. We see various college antics. And what's fun about this episode is that there's a couple of actors here that I recognize. We have Ralphio Sabarge, who will later betray Captain Janeway on Star Trek Voyager to the Kazon, and Brian Haley, who would replace Lowell Mathers on Wings. Eventually, some guy pukes on Sam's shoes, which results in Sam saying, "Oh boy," and then credits. When we come back, we have more party antics. Sam finds himself going to his dorm room. His door reads, "Wild thing lives here. Trespassers will be eaten." He goes into his room, where a couple of girls are sleeping, waiting for him to return. Sam quickly nopes out of this, and it has to be said that Scott Bakula's comic timing is on point in this episode. We cut to a scene of his bonehead friends shooting water balloons out the window of what appears to be the science lab that we later have a major scene in. Al makes his first appearance at the 6-minute and 15-second mark, reminiscing about his college days. Al's place asks the question how Al, an orphan, would ever have gone to college. And there's a number of ways he could have done that. For instance, maybe he took advantage of his military service to go to college after he was done, though that would have occurred after he spent some time in a camp held prisoner by the Vietnamese. Al reveals that he is there to stop someone from getting killed in a science lab explosion, and one Elizabeth from making a huge mistake which would land her on the run for the rest of her life. Elizabeth, who is seen in this scene from a distance, is played by Stacey Edwards. Stacey Edwards was in the movie Primary Colors, The Bling Ring, the movie Superbad, playing Eben's mom, no less, with assets that Jonah Hill finds particularly impressive. Sam's first impression with the person he's there to save is peeking out the window after she gets hit by one of his stupid friend's water balloons. As Al points out, this is not a great first impression. Elizabeth is a serious anti-war advocate, and blowing up the science lab was an act of protest. Sam goes to apologize to Elizabeth to smooth things over, so he can start winning her over, and perhaps stopping her from ruining her life. This encounter does not go well. She ends up passing him off to Duck after he fails to convince her that he wants to talk about what she's doing there. Duck is no less friendly. At first he's dismissive of him as a dumb jock, and then realizes that he's a deceptively smart person. Well, I'm sure the real Wild Thing is not deceptively smart, but Sam Beckett, in the guise of Wild Thing, sure is. And smart people, deceptive, smart people need to be watched. So, strike two there, Sam. We cut to a scene in the classroom with Sam and his bozo friends. And who else is there but Elizabeth herself, who eventually stands up and protests the university contributing to the war effort. We mostly don't hear her points, as the camera is mainly focused on Sam and the bozos. Sam ends up sticking up for her to his friends, and eventually they end up making a bet about getting her to the luau, which, much to my surprise, never actually factors into the plot. I mean, going to the luau does, but I expected at some point the fact that he made a bet for her to get her to the luau would come back to bite him in the butt, and it never does, much to my surprise. It would have if this were an actual 80s sex comedy. To win her over, Sam stands up and makes a number of statements regarding the war, and the fact that unless the South Korea stays on board, they cannot win the war. Cut to Stacy leaving to go to her group, the anti-war group, and Sam wants to follow. He's still trying to get in with her so he can prevent her from a life-ruining mistake. They end up running into one of the pledges, who of course is wearing underwear on the outside of his pants, carrying around meat to give to the dean's dog, to do some wacky scheme that the fraternity is doing. And Sam, after this person leaves, has to defend these actions. And this scene is kind of funny because we have Sam Beckett, who would not in his right mind, or if he had a choice in the matter, he doesn't really, he has to play out Wild Thing's life, he would not be participating in any of this. But he's defending this to Stacy, or rather, not Stacy, Stacy would be the character, to Elizabeth, saying that this is basically a more civilized ritual than perhaps in caveman times. And someday, perhaps the animals will be acting out these scenes, and they will evolve beyond it. But then Elizabeth asks, but will we have evolved beyond war? And my guess is no. We cut to the meeting where Duck is basically advocating for violence against the ruling class to stop violence. And that's not an argument I buy. Duck is suggesting that the ruling class, the only language that they know is that of violence, and I actually disagree. I think that the only language that the ruling class understands is money. You mess with their money, you get their attention, such as perhaps engaging in boycotts, boycott their products, work stoppages, peaceful protests against those companies that support war. Fighting war with more war doesn't seem like an effective solution. If you're trying to find peace, you will not do so with war or terrorist tactics, unless your aim is a new American revolution, which you're not going to get to through blowing up science labs. Al thinks that Elizabeth sees something in Duck because she feels guilty for being well off and not having to go to war, unlike the less fortunate who are drafted and can't get out of it because they don't have money, while also having a sincere belief in the cause, the anti-war cause. Sam goes to talk to her after and invites her to a party, and she's initially reluctant to go. She doesn't want to engage in juvenile behavior, such as drinking and puking. But Sam manages to convince her by making chicken noises. Hey, that always works on me. It certainly worked on Marty McFly in Back to the Future. In the next scene, we have a scene with Sam and Al where we make some good points about Sam's character that actually makes this episode a little bit worthwhile, in the fact that Sam was a genius. He skipped several grades and in fact ended up in college at the age of 16. So this would have resulted in not necessarily developing social skills, definitely not having any kind of fun, at least not fun of the juvenile sort these people engage in. His fun was reinventing the wheel or studying quantum physics. He never got to experience any of these college antics. And while the episode itself doesn't bring this up, I have to point out that that would have been really lonely for Sam Beckett, a 16-year-old college student, a genius, who is much younger than most of the people he's going to school with. Sam returns to the dorm, where Brian Haley's character is making a prank call about a bomb in the science lab. Yeah, these days that would get you arrested. Sam is super pissed at the prank, and this will come back to bite him in the butt. He ends up hanging up the phone on Brian Haley's character. Phone falls off of the wall onto Brian Haley's foot, which Sam says he's sorry about, but in a way that suggests that he's not really. Meanwhile, because Sam has an instant answer to a math question, his friends now want to cheat off him, though you would think that they would know better than this, having been the Wild Thing's friend for a while. Sam says no, but in response, well, hey, since you're not going to help us cheat, why don't we just go blow things up? Seems legit to me. They go to the women's dorm, where they plant some cherry bombs in the women's toilets. Sam ends up asking Al if he ever did such things when he was in college. And of course, nope, he was a super nerd. During the getaway, he's spotted by Elizabeth. Well, that's not going to help with the goodwill thing. He tries to make up for it the next day when he goes and visits her at the library. And she correctly points out that the two of them have nothing in common, and that would be Wild Thing and Elizabeth. But Sam is not trying to get with her. Sam argues that by using violence, they are as morally corrupt as the people she's protesting. Sam is essentially making my points. Duck enters the scene, and Sam advocates for the pen being mightier than sword. He's arguing for publicity, for getting the word out as to what they are trying to accomplish, that the media will be crucial to ending the war. Elizabeth accuses him of not caring about the people that are dying, which sets Sam off. He grabs her as he tries to leave, which is a little bit out of character, but he says he does care. Duck intervenes, and Sam pushes Duck into the library stacks. This doesn't seem to draw any attention whatsoever. He walks away, and he says, I had a brother that died in Vietnam, so don't tell me I don't care. And this once again is a very good use of the Sam Beckett character, because we're bringing up Tom, who died in Vietnam, which we only learned earlier this season. Duck calls after him and says, well, if only you cared about him enough before he went to Vietnam. But Elizabeth actually has some sympathy and empathy. She goes after Sam and tries to make him feel better, and eventually agrees to go to the luau. This is a very curiously serious scene in an otherwise goofy episode. I would make the argument almost that perhaps maybe this would have been better in another episode. Like perhaps these two plots don't quite mesh together. Like perhaps they should have done the goofy sex comedy and had a lower stakes reason for Sam to be there, and then done the Vietnam stuff in a different episode. At the luau, Elizabeth and Sam talk some, and eventually she reveals that Sam and his goofy ass friends gave her the idea that will lead to the episode's major event. The cherry bomb incident, which spread like wildfire on the campus, and one wonders why they weren't caught and eventually disciplined by the school, gave Elizabeth and Duck the idea to plant a bomb in the science lab, which will send a different kind of message. They're essentially using the tactics of his friends for more serious means. But this, of course, will result in someone dying, and Sam, in a panic, tries to call the school. But the school has already been pranked by these people enough, so they are unresponsive. Eventually, they realize that one of the pledges has gone to the science lab, and they realize that this person is the one who's going to die. Sam and Elizabeth take off, while the person that they were just talking about, whose name I believe is Scooter, has just come back, so he's not going to the science lab after all. But Sam doesn't know this. Al ends up calling after him, saying, hey look, he's back here, he's fine. If you keep going, you and Elizabeth are gonna die. But he shouts this at Sam as he's long away. Hey, Al, come here for a minute. Yeah, I want to talk to you for a second. You are a hologram. There's no reason for you to be shouting after Sam. Have Ziggy center you on him so that you can talk to him and get this message to him a little bit more effectively. Second question, if Scooter returned from the lab, who was the person that was going to die in it at the explosion? They never identify who this person actually is. Anyway, we cut to Sam, and Al has finally arrived to let him know about the information, and Elizabeth as they go to the bomb in the locker to disarm it. After several tense minutes, coordinates and instructions from Al. They manage to do so. Only it doesn't solve the problem. Apparently, a bomb is about to go off still. And that's because Duck did not trust Elizabeth. There's a second bomb. Sam's numbskull friends arrive at the scene as Sam is beating the crap out of Duck, using violence to stop violence, I might add, preventing him from leaving and trying to get him to disclose the location of the bomb so they don't explode. Eventually, they find it, Duck gets away, and they use the balloon launcher that they were using earlier to launch the bomb. And this seems to attract no attention whatsoever. And the explosion doesn't seem to be any bigger than fireworks. So that was supposed to blow up an entire building, and nobody seems to be getting in trouble for their actions in this episode. Least of all Duck, who essentially wanted to commit an act of terrorism. We cut to the coda of Sam and Elizabeth back at the party, having a serious conversation. And I might add that this friendship is doomed. Because see, once Sam leaves out, the Wild Thing is going to have none of the depth that Sam has, which attracted Elizabeth to him in the first place. He's just going to be the same old meathead that he always was. And Elizabeth isn't going to be interested in that for very long. And what happens if she brings up his dead brother in Vietnam? What dead brother in Vietnam? What are you talking about? She's in the final scenes, but I don't believe that the friendship between the two of them is going to last beyond Sam's leap. As far as this episode is concerned, though, Scott Bakula's and Stacey Edwards' chemistry here is undeniable. Sam eventually is dragged away to perform the ritual that I guess he has to perform at the luau. He has to dress up in this elaborate dress and be a god of whatever, blah blah blah, and recite these lines, which when did he have time to learn those lines? I mean, he does have a photographic memory, so he could have been given those lines real quick to spit out. And then he must make a leap. And Al says to him, as he's roly-polied upwards, to leap into a pool, that if he wants to leap, he has to leap. The original Wild Thing broke his neck, having missed the pool. But Sam takes the leap, dives into the pool, he recites that the fraternity is the only life for him, and then he leaps. Like I said, a lightweight episode, doesn't really amount to much. Performances are fine. There's nothing really bad about this episode. There's just nothing really special about it either. It's skippable. It's skippable. Next week we'll be talking about Another Mother, which is an episode that presents me with far more opportunities for commentary than this one did. If you like this episode and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can follow me on Twitter at Core Productions. You can join my Corman Productions Facebook page. You can buy something from the Corman Productions store on Zazzle. You can buy me a copy, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. And of course, you can like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Corman Productions, signing off.